Hey folks, Carolyn here to tell you just a little bit about the Games and Online Harassment Hotline. It's a free text message-based, confidential emotional support hotline that was created specifically for the gaming community. So whether you're a player, a developer, a streamer, a competitor, any part of the gaming community, the hotline is here for you, ready to provide emotional support or help finding the referrals and resources that you may need. Visit gameshotline.org for more information.
Like most of the women are wearing white, the men are wearing, black or brown, but almost no one is wearing blue. A couple generations outside of freedom, but that living reminder, what must it have been like, to daily, have that reminder there in small and large ways.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined by two women who would have no trouble staying away from the mainland if it meant eating unlimited gumbo. Carolyn Pettit.
Hello.
And Ebony Adams.
I really want some gumbo. That's not a joke. It's not a joke.
I mean, you should make some and bring it to me.
I've tried. I'm not good at it. Anyway, keep going with the intro. Yeah, I've tried.
Interesting. This week we're talking about Daughters of the Dust, the next film in our month-long spotlight on Black cinema. Stay tuned. All right, friends, sorry that this episode is coming a little bit late, although I don't think anyone actually cares, because technology is the worst.
It is. And shout out to everybody who sent me very nice messages on Twitter that was like, hey, no worries. It's all good. We're excited to get the episode when we get it. And I was like, our listeners really are the best.
They're so lovely. I saw that. Really it was very touching. Even though Ebony is totally a goober head, which we now know means peanut.
Or peanut head, since you said goober head. But yes. We learned from Daughters of the Dust that goober, which we'll get into the movie itself in a minute, but in that movie it's revealed that goober means peanut, which for me was a very light bulb-y moment because when I went to movies back when going to movies was a thing we could do, I would occasionally buy the candy goobers, which are chocolate covered peanuts, but I never knew there was a connection between the name of the candy and goober actually being a word that means peanut. So now I know.
See, my family's from the South. I mean, my family is Black and from the South, so I did know that. And I am now going to start calling y'all both goober heads. And I want you to take it in the spirit in which it is intended, which is love.
It is. But it was in the movie, which again I will introduce in a second. But like there's this whole moment where they're like, people have their given name, and then they all have like several nicknames, and one of them is Goober, and you're like, what? I was like,
scratch.
I love this. Like, it was just so, it was so precious and pure. It was,
but your favorite, I believe, was Pete and Repeat. So yeah, I'm hoping that you and I can work out some kind of costume for Halloween.
Oh, shit.
For virtual Zoom Halloween.
Yeah. I love this. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If you haven't guessed, because I already said it in the intro, today we're talking about Daughters of the Dust. It was released in 1991, and it was the first film directed by a Black woman to get a general theatrical release in the U.S. of A's. This sweeping work by Jolie Dash is a haunting, languid, lyrical story song about a multi-generational group of Gullah women on the eve of a life-altering move to the mainland and up north. The film is a gorgeous and expressive meditation on family, love, change, death, isolation, pain, and so much more. Filtered through the experiences of the Gullah people, descendants of enslaved Africans in the lowlands and islands off the coast of South Carolina. Yo, this movie is like, it is so extraordinarily dense.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think we get movies this dense very often.
We really don't, isn't it? It's very ambition can have like weird connotations when they say that about media. It's often a way for people to say like it's ambitious, but it fails in XYZ. But this film is tremendously ambitious in the sense that it's very experimental. It really offers you an opportunity to see like the potential of film in a new way, which is not to say there's anything wrong with like mainstream film. Y'all know I love, just regular, popcorn movies, but I had not seen Daughters of the Dust all the way through before watching it for the podcast. It was one of those things that like it's on, film studies syllabi, it's on curricula, it's on greatest of list and whatever. And yet for whatever reason, I had never sat through the entire thing. And so my knowledge of the film and my perception of what happened in the film was completely wrong. I was not ready to kind of be enfolded in the world of the film that we get. It's linear and yet non-linear. There's a straightforward narrative and yet there isn't a straightforward narrative. There's, incredibly naturalistic moments contrasted with incredibly sort of exaggerated moments. It's a real treat. Like I encourage everyone to check it out, like if you haven't seen it.
I think, if we, especially putting it in its historical context. So again, the early 90s, this was a time when I think Black male filmmakers, particularly maybe like Spike Lee and John Singleton, were kind of hailed as like that, finally like the advent of like Black cinema in Hollywood in some sort of like mainstream-ish tangible way had, sort of arrived or whatever, at least as sort of Hollywood trades, Hollywood magazines and things had put it. So, but imagine you're Julie Dash, you're the first woman to be in a position to release a film, focused on Black women, directed and written by a Black woman that's going to get a theatrical release. The pressure to create a kind of what we might call mainstream or standard, structurally standard narrative, a more commercially viable film, must have been, I think, in some way immense, like the pressure to do that. And yet she, so I think it's a tremendously brave film in its, uncompromising nature, the nature of its approach to its storytelling. And I think some critics at the time did understand and did appreciate it for what it was doing. I did read a review from the time period of the film's release. So this is from is January 1992. This is a critic named Godfrey Cheshire, who is still writing today. And he was, at the time, he was a critic for what was called the New York Press, an independent newspaper in New York City that's now defunct. But he had this to say, and I thought it was really like insightful. And, I was like, wow, it's really cool that at least some critics at the time got this, appreciated this about the film. He said, more a sequence of dramatic tableau than a drama per se, Daughters of the Dust offers a highly distinctive take on one of the crucial issues raised by recent Black filmmaking, the possibility of a filmic language which reflects African-American traditions rather than the prototypes of European theater and fiction which inform Hollywood's technique. And he goes on to say, Dash's film, even less driven than other recent Black films, builds its case on the intangibles of character, sense perception, and thematic associations. No doubt she could have made Roots in Skirts, italicized as like a fake title, no doubt she could have made Roots in Skirts very easily. It obviously took more guts to pursue the more difficult track and considerable vision to reach a destination that's so gracefully assured, unburdened by overt theorizing or rhetoric. If Dash's methods at first feel disorienting because it lacks all the expected signposts toward meaning, as well as the accustomed dramatic velocity, just trust her guidance, and you'll see that she's not trying to shove you into her film. She's weaving it all around you.
Mm-hmm.
So I just started a filmmaking class, literally this morning, and one of my classmates, when we were all introducing ourselves, said this about the films that she wants to make. She wants to bring her stories out of the naturalistic world and is a bit more dreamy, that hovers above reality. And when she said that in class, I was like, that's this movie.
Yeah.
Not that multiple movies can't do that, but I was like, that's such a apt description of Daughters of the Dust, because it really is, I think you said like lyrical. It does not, Julie Dash does not give a fuck about traditional storytelling techniques. or is using them in a way and like molding them in a way that is to her vision very uniquely.
And while, like Ebony, I think there's absolutely a place for what has become established as the dominant kind of format for narrative, cinema, narrative, television, narrative storytelling. But I also feel like that is not the only valid way to tell stories, right? That's not like the one true visual cinematic language. And so when I encounter a film like Daughters of the Dust that doesn't kind of give me that specific structure that my brain and my emotions and everything are so sort of wired to expect at this point, it can be a really it takes an adjustment on my part. Like I have to be like, okay, this film is actually asking something of me, the viewer. It's like challenging me in some way because I have to be more observant, more participatory. But there's also something profound about the way a film like this, like the way I can unwind in my expectations and just let it be woven around me, as the kind of the critic puts it. Like let the narrative just it takes shape around me as this film feels like it does.
I want to go back to something you were saying real quick, Anita, about Julie Dash, using sort of non-traditional filmic language or storytelling techniques. I want to push back a little bit on that because to me, it seems very clear that what she's using is non-Western storytelling techniques, And one of the films that I thought of as I was watching this was another one that we discussed on the podcast, Maddie Diop's The Atlantics, right? Because it seems to me that there's a very African sensibility, which makes sense given the story that's being told in Daughters of the Dust. And in fact, there's this explicit reference to storytelling and storytelling as a way of conveying history and providing meaning. Nana Pazant talks about the figure of the griot or the griot, and how important it was from the before times and how important it is now. The way that stories are not presented, perhaps in a way that Western audiences are accustomed to, but that is very familiar to other people, other cultures, other communities. And so, I think one of the things that is so refreshing about this film is how comfortable I felt in it. I mentioned, gumbo and goober and peanuts, right? Like my family is from roughly this area, although my family is not Gullah or Geechee. And so this film felt like it resonated with me. It rung a bell in certain ways because these are the kinds of stories and they are told in a certain way that harkens back to the way things sound in the church, or the way things sound at your grandma's knee on the porch, or the way extended families get together. And Julie Dash throughout this film is very conscious of not saying things explicitly that she will assume a certain audience will understand and get.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear that. Thank you for sharing that. Or calling me on that, rather. I want us to get into the themes, but I was just thinking really quick while we're on the subject of the structure of the film or how it's made, is I think our listeners we have listeners that sort of gravitate more towards each of us in terms of the movies and the ways that we look at, we joke about Caro movies, right? And so for those of you who tend to like the movies I like more, I went into this with a lot of apprehension. You know what I'm saying. But
I get what you're saying. The Anita contingent. Yes.
Yeah. I don't think it's very big. Let's be honest. I think it's actually quite small. But for those of you who are just straddling that line of you really like your mainstream shit and this stuff seems a little artsy.
The people that get together with you in Discord and talk about the CW shows that you watch. No shade. I know you love that stuff. It's totally fine.
I don't love it. I just watch it. Okay? There's a difference.
Anyway, what about the Anita Maniacs?
What I'm trying to say is that I think I went into this film a little apprehensive to be oh my God, this is going to be a lot. And I was this is going to be the kind of movie where I'm going to really struggle with paying attention, but I'm going to feel guilty about it because it's important. Look, I'm just being real with y'all.
I love it.
So I say that because I watched it in two parts. Like I was just not in the mood to watch it. And sometimes for the podcast, like we got to watch it before we have to record, right? It's like we have time limits for that. And so I watched half of it, and I actually kind of like that I broke it up because I was like, it sat with me. Like it didn't, I was seeing the visuals of it. I was like kind of in that etherealness of it. So when I went back, I was like, yeah, I wonder what's going to happen. Like I was ready for being present with it in a way that I wasn't with the first half, if that makes sense. And I'm glad that I had that experience because I didn't want to come on here and be like, yeah, it was important, but I hated it. Mm-hmm. I started out talking about how this is really dense, because you really do have to pay attention and you to track all the traces that are going, right? All of the themes. And I think maybe like to get the conversation started about themes is one that really stuck out to me was about assimilation. Mm-hmm. That, you know, you have this character, Yellow Mary, who is she's from this family, but she had left, right? She had gone to the mainland, and you know, you hear about her traumas and stuff like that. But like when you first approach her, she's very like, I am, you know, almost like I'm a city girl now, right? Like y'all are savages. Like I can't believe you do the things that you do. Like it's so great being in the city and watching her missing her family and her culture and realizing the importance of it and like dropping the front and the bravery and the role that she had to play in the mainland, outside of the space of her people, where all of the judgment is, you know, and all of the fear of violence and all of the other aspects of her reality exist. And I found that incredibly powerful.
I could spend this entire episode talking just about the character of Yellow Mary. She's that fascinating. And I wish that the actor Barbara Oh, who played her, had gone on to star in conservatively 1,000 more films that I could watch. She is that compelling to watch. But so Yellow Mary, as you said, you know, is part of the Pesant family that lives on Ebo Island. But during the course of this film is getting ready. Many of the family members are getting ready to move away from the island that they've called home for generations and move to the mainland or move up north, as some of the family already has done, like one character, Viola Pesant, who's also become a very, you know, staunch Christian. But so Yellow Mary is an outsider on several fronts in the film. Not only has she moved away from the family, but as you say, like she is like physically distanced from them just in her bearing. So when we first meet her, as she's being rowed in this boat back towards Ebo Landing with her lover, Trula, she is dressed in this exquisite white dress that, you know, we will see like mirror images of on the other women, especially the younger women on the island later. But she's in this beautiful white dress that almost looks like a bridal dress. And she, in fact, has a veil over her face, you know? And so when she comes and meets again with the family, she stands apart, and she deliberately stands apart. But as she surrenders to the memory and the power of, you know, the family and connection, we start to hear more about what her life was like. Looking at her coming in with her fancy store-bought biscuits in a tin that, you know, she tries to offer, and her beautiful clothes and her, you know, high-heeled white boots. You know, you would think that this was like a very privileged, like fancy lady, right? And what we learn is, you know, the family calls her, some of the members of the family called her ruined because she's been a prostitute. That's how she has survived. But also, you know, she tells that horrible story about being a wet nurse to a family that moved to Cuba and brought her along. And when she wanted to leave, they would not let her. And so she had to, quote, ruin herself to be let go. I mean, just like the unfolding of her narrative is so beautifully done. And then, you know, to have her decide to stay at the end, to have so many of the family confirm their desire to leave, but for Yellow Mary to change her mind and to say goodbye to her lover and whatever her life was and whatever her hopes were, going to Nova Scotia because Canada sounds so cool to her, and her dress changes, her aspect changes, her demeanor changes, and she almost looks like a different woman at the end of the film. And we can also talk about the fact that her name is Yellow Mary. Like, oh my God, seriously, we could talk forever just about this character. So you have all of these, dark complexioned members of the family calling this woman Yellow Mary, and even one of the characters saying all that yellow wasted. Just the kind of colorism conversations, that occur in the Black community, and the question of what is Yellow Mary's provenance? How is it that she looks so different from the other members of her family? Is there, in fact, more trauma there that is being unspoken? There's just, as you say, Anita, like this film is dense. There is so much going on at any given moment, so much to be thinking about. And each character, each scene, each, music cue, like there's so much going on there that flowers, out into something else.
Yeah, there's so many, each thread, if we think of like Yellow Mary as one thread, like each thread offers so much richness to think about. And then, of course, the way that all these threads come together and collide with each other, is just this explosion of grief and hope and past and future, so yeah, the way, like in both a literal sense of like, so you have the Pesant family, so many of them there on Ebo Landing, which is off the coast of Georgia, are planning to leave, to go to the mainland. Some are coming back to Ebo Landing just to sort of witness this moment. And the way that the imagery in this film, throughout the film, like supports and enhances and like lifts up all of these themes and these feelings and these ideas, is really remarkable. One of my favorite kind of images comes from very early in the film when Yellow Mary and Viola are on a boat riding into Ebo Landing, and with them is this photographer gentleman named Sneed, or I think his name is Sneed.
Yeah.
And he has, so it's 1902, and so he's given the kids this like fascinating kind of new toy, this new like technological innovation of a toy, which is a kaleidoscope, right? And to me, that kaleidoscope of like is in itself some sort of kind of meta commentary on this film and on the way that like you can kind of look at it and think about it from so many different angles and see, so many different things in it, like reflected back in its narrative. There's just so much going on that it's really remarkable.
Yeah. One of another thread, or actually, I think that the point in the review that you read, Carolyn, where the reviewer says like it's not just roots and skirts.
Yeah.
I think is really astute in terms of the fact that like this movie is so specifically about Black women, so strongly and so specifically about that experience and about their relationship to family, to culture, to whiteness, to men, right, to the patriarchy, to white supremacy. And I think we see that really strongly in the character of Eula.
Yeah.
Because Eula is a young woman who's pregnant, and she was raped, and she is not saying who did it. And her husband, Eli, one of the early parts of the film is him freaking the fuck out about how she's ruined, and she's like, no, like she's not his anymore, and all of this really disturbing, troubling ways to think about women, right, and ownership of women. And I think that there's a lot of power in the fact that, like, even though that was early on, the whole film is really like taking that to task in some ways and recognizing the trauma that like that aggressors are causing on these communities in many different ways. And I love that at the end, Eula has this speech, this like long monologue. Yeah. And as a part of it, she's just calling everyone out on their shit in a lot of ways, right? Like, I feel like it's such a climax to the film and like pulling all of the pieces together where she just kind of like, I don't want to say loses it, but she just like is like, she can't contain all of this hardship and grief and tension between family members and everything that's going on. And one of the things she says in that is we live our lives always expecting the worst because we feel we don't deserve no better. And I felt like that was a really powerful culmination of like what is looming over everybody's story and everybody's experiences in this movie.
I'm so glad you brought up Eula and Eli, but like talking about the way the film treats its male characters specifically, because they do they do exist in the film and they are important, and yet they are still ancillary in a way. There are moments when the men on Ebo Landing almost seem to be there, under sufferance. They could all disappear, and you do get the feeling that life would continue uninterrupted, largely unchanged in this place and in this family, because so much of the machinery of keeping the family going and keeping life where it is through the work of the hands of these women. And so even though you get characters like, Eli, who is the husband of Eula, or Bilal, who, explains like a key part of the myth around the walking African or the flying African, the legend of this, these escaping slaves. Even though we see him near the start of the film, close to the opening, answering like the call to prayer and, reading from a Quran and praying, and he leads, the small Muslim community on the island. Nevertheless, Mr. Sneed is there, the groom and the newlywed couple is there. Nevertheless, this is a story about women and so many different types of women and women who want vastly different things. And the movie has space for all of it, and part of what Eula is saying at the end is that there is space in this wide world for all of this, all of the things that we want, if we can just expand, our understanding of what we can have and just open our arms to it rather than keeping them tightly clenched around what we have and holding fast to it.
Yeah, that multifaceted, extremely varied nature of the women of the Pesant family is, for me, really the heart of the film. I mean, so much of the film, the dialogue in this film is women hashing out their own identities, debating each other, right? I mean, there's debates about religion, there's debates about what role the culture, the past should play in the future of the family, how much do they hold to and keep the traditions and, of like their ancestors. It's fascinating. It's rare and radical in a way just to even hear women this fully formed, as characters with their own identities, interact with each other, be part of like the same fabric, have these like philosophical, ideological, emotional, conversations about what matters and who they are. And it's also, for me, extremely important to note that although this film is shot through with, on some levels, with grief and anger, and it is not by any means like visually or otherwise like a dreary film. Right. Like, on the contrary, like this is a film of light. I mean, in terms of and beauty. I mean, I'm a person who, obviously cinema is inherently a visual medium, and I will sometimes like to take screenshots of images in films that I find particularly resonant or meaningful or beautiful. And this was a film where I was just constantly wanting to take screenshots, because there's so many shots in this film that are just so, they're both like just aesthetically beautiful and remarkable, like in their own right. And they're also like rich with meaning and with life and with, like bounty and, you know, celebration. Like there's an amazing, of course, feast scene where, you know, the gumbo and the crab and, you know, and the food itself is, you know, you really get a sense of like the taste and the texture and of the food itself as part of the texture of their shared. And I mean, and it's just so remarkable that the shit, like the ways in which they are a family unit, like their shared culture, and simultaneously, as so many families are so, you know, divergent and diverse from each other and going off in wildly different directions.
Right. There is a voiceover that happens because the film is narrated by
the unborn child.
Yeah. And also Nana Pazant.
Yes.
Yeah. Who's the great grandmother of the tribe,
like
or
the matriarch,
the
right?
family,
I suppose, in a sense, yeah.
But this one near the end really stuck out at me because it was talking about how, in order to prevent incest, somebody in a family had to be responsible for record keeping, and you had to just do it in your head and hold all of the like times, like who was born to who, like the family tree, but also like who was sold to who, right? And like, you know, the to make sure that when people came and crossed paths again, that like they weren't, you know, having children when they were actually related and stuff. And I was just like, it was just a passing comment, right? Like I think a lot of this movie are like these passing comments that just fucking hit you in the face, where you're like, I need to pause and think about this for a second.
That story, and then also the many times we see hands that are darkened and stained permanently with indigo, just really stuck with me. I think it was so remarkable that, you know, the director chose to show like the inheritance of slavery, not with the images that we are accustomed to seeing, which is like scarred bodies, you know, but instead something that I don't recall ever having seen before, but these stained hands of indigo. So, you know, from the processing and the manufacture. And I think it's so interesting that we see, you know, almost everyone in the family as they gather for this family gathering. Like most of the women are wearing white, you know, the men are wearing, you know, black or brown, but almost no one is wearing blue except for Nana Pazant, you know, like wearing the evidence of that indigo. And, you know, as a living reminder of that period of slavery, you know, as Kara said, the film takes place in 1902. And so, you know, a couple generations outside of freedom, but that living reminder, what must it have been like, you know, to daily, you know, have that reminder there in small and large ways. And Nana Pazant is, you know, so emphatic about not letting any of those memories, you know, pass into the ether. She talks about, you know, the glass bottle trees. So, you know, it's something that's been associated with, you know, like folk magic practices, with folk religious practices, you know, as a way to like denigrate it. People, you know, folks call it hoodoo sometimes, you know, but she says to her, you know, salty ass daughter-in-law, you know, like no one ever said there were spirits in these glass bottles. These bottles are the daily reminder of what has gone on before. It is a visual cue. So the sound they make as the wind ruffles through them, like it is meant to ground you. That is the magic, the grounding that happens, not the glass bottles themselves. You can, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. The magic comes from the memory, and you cannot let go of this memory, because if you do, where are your roots? Where do you go? And we see what happens if you don't have those roots with Yellow Mary, you know? And so that's one of the reasons why she has to come back.
Yeah. I another point that I think is so I was thinking about this actually because I mentioned this before and I didn't like how I mentioned it, but there is a Cherokee man who is one of the daughter's romantic interests, maybe lovers, romantic interests, what have you. And I I was thinking about why it doesn't feel like, because it's a very, very small part of the story, but it felt really important to be like, well, we didn't ask to come here and take over your land, right? And just that acknowledgement of Indigenous lands and Indigenous folks in this space, like even as something so dense, it felt like was included to make that kind of statement, right? To include that.
Yeah, and that's just another. I mean, and it ultimately, yeah. So he and Iona, right, who's one of the daughters now in the Pizant family, have, there's some pull between them. We don't know the full nature of it, but it's just another representation, another indication of yet another direction in which sort of the descendants of the Pizant family can and may go, right? Because I mean, she does end up like at the very last moment. I think he rides in on his horse, and she and it is
wouldn't go.
It's this kind of
incredibly
quintessentially
romantic.
classic romantic, image, right, of this beautiful man riding in on this majestic horse, and she runs off, and her mother screaming her name, and it's and it's like it's one of those moments. It's like hopeful and tragic, all at once. Like you feel the mother's pain, but you also understand the daughter's, desire to pursue this and to stay with him. And it's wonderful.
I loved the ecstasy that certain characters were allowed to feel, the unbridled joy, particularly in romantic love. So, we have the newlyweds, this man and woman who I don't think say anything, but they just have these like loving caresses and glances at each other, and they briefly touch each other as they pass. We have the daughter who goes off with St. Julian last child, and we also have Yellow Mary and Trula, who before Yellow Mary decides to go back for that gumbo at the end of the movie, there's beautiful scenes of her and Trula like frolicking together on the beach or smoking together in the tree. Like it is so important that there's not just like struggle and strife and contention and trauma and pain, but there are these moments of just like almost unworldly joy that completely suffuse these people's faces. Like it's absolutely exquisite.
Which that, when you talk about it that way, reminds me of the beauty of oh fuck! Why am I forgetting the name of the movie right now? The Barry Jenkins film,
Moonlight, or
if
no,
Beale Street could talk.
Yes,
oh,
where
God,
like
so good.
Right. I think there's a lot of similarities here thematically in terms of like they are both movies that show Black struggle, but they also show Black love, right?
Yes.
And I think that there's
something very interesting going on with Trula and Yellow Mary. And, as I alluded to at the beginning, like the fact that she is called Yellow Mary demands that we ask more. Eula, who has been raped, and the implication is that it was likely a white man who did it. And again, this is one of the things that the film does not explicitly state, but, hints at by the way that people won't talk about it. And so, one of the fears that Eula has, and it's horrible that she has to carry this concern in addition to dealing with the aftermath of the sexual assault. But one of the concerns that she carries is that if I reveal to my husband, Eli, that I was raped by a white man, he is going to do something so foolish in an act of vengeance that's going to end up in him being, hurt or killed. Eli crucially has conversations with other male members of or male citizens of the island who talk about their work in anti-lynching laws, which I think is relevant to the conversation here. But the thing I wanted to bring out is that it is Yellow Mary who says to Eula, don't ever tell Eli who did it. To reveal that will only cause more trouble. And obviously she says it in a much better way than I just articulated it, but she emphasizes like the importance of not telling Eli, and that the fact that this kind of hurt and pain is so it's an understood fact among these Black women. It doesn't need to be explicitly stated what has occurred or who is responsible, but instead we will gather around you and support you and tell you what we feel is the best way to handle it. And maybe it isn't the best way, but this is the way that we have dealt with it. And I think it's so interesting that it is Yellow Mary who has this conversation with her, not, Viola, not Nana Pazant, not one of the other women, because the fact that Yellow Mary is called Yellow Mary and that she has a lighter skin tone encourages me, anyway, perhaps not everyone else, to think like, what is Yellow Mary's provenance? She has talked about how she was left alone and she, sort of raised herself on the island. It makes you wonder who her parents were, how she got here, why she looks so different from the other members of the island. Is she, in fact, the child of, a sexual assault? And then the fact that her lover, Trula, is also has, a much lighter complexion, is not fair-skinned, but, certainly fairer-skinned than many of the other people on the island. There's so much at play here, and just the fact of their existence, that demands that we ask, what is not being said here? How have we understood it? And how have we allowed certain wounds to be like scabbed over, but still festering beneath and unhealed?
Yeah.
A lot going on in this movie, y'all. A lot going on.
A lot.
2 hours. The article that I shared, and I think is going to be in the show notes, one of the reviewers says the film feels like it's 3 or 4 hours, not in a bad way, but just because it is just this immense tapestry. It is no small thing. And once you are in it, it is like being sucked under by the undertow of the ocean that's, is right on the borders of this land. But once you are in it, and you will be there for a while.
Yeah. It's such a shame that Julie Dash hasn't made another feature since then.
It's a crime.
Yeah.
She has spoken about the fact that she is working on an Angela Davis biopic. So I don't know, if it's got financial backing, if a studio support or if it's what have you, what state it's in, but certainly that sounds like a great meshing of subject matter and filmmaker. And so I certainly hope that we do actually, that project does see the light of day.
Hell yeah.
Before we wrap up, I do want to say that Julie Dash was part of what's called the LA Rebellion, which was a group of, Black filmmakers, roughly I think late 70s, 80s. And, many of them coming out of UCLA, but doing like experimental, fiercely independent work in cinema. And UCLA Archives has an online repository of information about the filmmakers within the LA Rebellion, where you can find out more information, find out more about their films. But I really, as we do this month-long salute on Black cinema, I really encourage those of you who would like to check some of this stuff out to go check out info on the LA Rebellion.
Hell yeah. I didn't know that. That's really exciting. I want to look at that.
UCLA Archive is a treasure trove. Like, seriously, y'all, the UCLA Library Film and Television Archive, their collections are absolutely killer. And there's so much that is available online. Just, go spend some time dipping around there. You'll be amazed at what you see.
Cool. All right, y'all. We, I think based on this conversation, I'll highly recommend that you watch this movie.
Yes,
absolutely.
And tell all of your friends to watch this movie. Ebony, did you want to talk at all about Lemonade?
You know what? I'll talk about it in the bonus. So the
cool.
Beyonce Lemonade section will be in the bonus.
Awesome. Let's do that. All right, y'all. We'll be right back.
Hey friends, thanks for listening to FFR. If you enjoy our weekly conversations about the intersection of feminism and pop culture, consider hopping over to patreon.com/femfreak and joining our podcast community. You can get access to exclusive bonus episodes, join our friendly Discord server, participate in polls to help decide topics for future episodes, and more. Plus, you'll be helping us keep bringing FFR to the virtual podcast airwaves. Visit patreon.com/femfreak today.
Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. Ebony, what do you got?
What's up? Okay, so based upon our viewing of Daughters of the Dust for this week's episode, I want to shout out an old-time freak out for me, which was the very first Toni Morrison novel I ever read it in college. It was written, or published rather, in 1977. It is her novel Song of Solomon, which is, I think, either her third or fourth book. It is, like Daughters of the Dust, a multi-generational tale of a Black family in the U.S. It is, by turns, hilarious. It is harrowing. It is deep. It is, eviscerating to the spirit. Nobody can write like Miss Toni Morrison wrote. Like, y'all, just the way the woman put, words to paper. But the story is about the Dead family, and primarily Milkman Dead, who is the son of, like middle-class Black parents in Michigan. I want to say the 40s is when the book starts. It is about how Milkman comes to term with his past, with his family's past, but also the larger ecosystem in which Blackness comes to life in this country, and the burdens that Black people have to carry because of the generational curses of slavery. Some of the most important characters in the novel, despite the amount of page time they might get, include Pilot Dead, who is Milkman's aunt, who is this otherworldly figure who has in fact been cast out of various communities for being a quote, witchy woman. She is a woman who has no navel. And so people take this as evidence that she is not quite human. But her ability to get right to the heart of the matter and speak truth to Milkman, and to, importantly, his father, who was her brother, about the ways that you must live, knowing what it has cost your people to get where they are, is just, it is absolutely gorgeous storytelling. But the reason why it sprung to mind is because there is the story in Daughters of the Dust where they talk about, we see this, beautiful wooden carving of an African enslaved person in water. And various people tell bits of the story about how it's the slave ship that carried these people over from Africa. Once they were offloaded from the ship, they looked at the land and they walked back onto the water and walked back to Africa. And this is a story that is told in many different forms, in many different regions. And in Song of Solomon, it is the myth of the flying African. And so, we have this beautiful story of Solomon, the slave, flying away from slavery, flying away from all that weighs him down. So, I'm not doing 1/100th of the justice this novel deserves. It's still my favorite Toni Morrison novel, and that's saying something. So, Song of Solomon, please do yourself the favor of checking it out.
I feel embarrassed at how underread I am in Toni Morrison's.
Girl, let me listen. Who wants a book club? I will.
Me.
Let's do it. Okay.
I do. I always do. I need to get in on that.
Yes.
Cool. I got to stop reading my bullshit sci-fi books.
No, you need to keep reading
amazing.
those.
I love
good
them.
books you're reading in sci-fi.
Yeah, you're reading great books. You need to stop watching the CW garbage.
Okay, look, I have not regaled you with all the amazing books that I've read because we don't have enough freak outs to do that with. But I'm currently reading a book that I don't like, and it's really annoying because I want to know what happens. So I'm like slogging through it just to get to the end when I'm
Girl,
like,
you better than me. I'll Google spoilers in a fucking minute.
Oh, I guess I could have just done that. I committed. I'm gonna see it to the end, but that's not my freak out. I actually do have a freak out this week.
Freak out about it, baby.
I'm gonna. So Sundance ended last week, and I got to catch a few more films. And one of the ones that I would recommend folks checking out when it becomes available is called CODA. CODA is an acronym for Child of Deaf Adults, and it is a coming of age story about a young girl who is in conflict with her deaf parents and brother as she attempts to pursue her singing career. And it is directed by Sian Heder. Amelia Jones plays the daughter, and then the family is played by Marlee Matlin, which is probably one of the most famous deaf actors, Troy Koster and Daniel Durant, which are all deaf actors. And the movie is really lovely. Like it is a, we talk a lot here about how we really just want other people's stories told, right? We want different perspectives and different stories told. And that's what this is doing in the ever enticing coming of age genre. You know what I mean? Like those are always kind of delightful kind of stories. And so, I think some of the value in the fact that we're being told this story is, for many of us, we don't interact with deaf folks on a regular basis. And so there's these scenes where, because she's the only hearing person in her house, there's a scene where she's sitting in the kitchen and she's trying to study, and there's just so much fucking noise happening. And it's kind of a funny scene, right? Like the mom is banging pots and pans in the kitchen, and the dad is farting or something, and the brother is swiping on Tinder, and she's just fuck, it's so loud in here. And she puts her headphones on, and then her mom comes and is like, oh, why do you always have your headphones on? And it's just it is that kind of sort of, she's a teenager that's trying to figure out her life, and these are the difficulties she has. Also her family they're fisher. Well, her dad and her brother are fishermen, and so is she. And that's a big part of the story in terms of they need her to constantly interpret. But there is a tension around needing her and not needing her, and her wanting to go off on her own and honestly pursue pursue singing, which is something that her family can't have a really hard time getting behind because they can't hear it, right?
Right.
So yeah, I highly recommend it. Apple bought it for $25 million. It was immediately had a bidding war, so it will be available probably fairly soon. There's just two things I wanted to say a little critically. And this is big picture, not necessarily about this movie in a specific way. But I found it a little sad that we are seeing the perspective of a white cis, I think she's straight, hearing person, even though we get so much great great deaf acting and representation in this. And the only reason I would say that is because we have such a deficit of stories about disabled folks, right? And so there was a part of me that was man, I wish that this was about maybe the brother or something like that, because we just don't get those stories enough. But that's not anything to say about the quality of this movie, just more of I would really love to see more disabled media being celebrated and created and celebrated, and bidding wars over them, and so and then the other thing was I watched several films at Sundance, and the way that it worked digitally was that there was a representative from Sundance that would introduce the movie. You would talk to the director for a minute or two, and then the movie would start. The screening would start. This was the only movie that had an interpreter, a sign language interpreter. And I was I get it, because you're probably going to have I understand that choice, but I was really disappointed that I'm well, why wouldn't you just have it for everything? Right. And make all of your screenings accessible in that way. So,
that's interesting because, as many of you know, I have another life working for women in film. And so
I almost did a spit take on that. Ebony has a life. That's so funny.
I know, right? But no, so I was responsible for programming women in films panels for Sundance, and they were very clear about wanting to have more rigorous and consistent accessibility options. In fact, they made it sound as if they were not optional at all, which is great. if you were hosting. So we had to make sure that like we had live captions available for our panels, for instance, and transcriptions available. Having an ASL interpreter was optional, but strongly encouraged. And ultimately, we weren't able to secure one in time. And that's on us. Like, do not feel sorry for us. This should be standard industry practice. But it's interesting that you say that, Anita, because yeah, like Sundance is trying to make this like a core pillar of, you know, their model. But yeah, I just think like folks are still taking their time catching up, and there just needs to be more consequences for people not making these things available. Again, this stuff should not be optional. It should be there all the time. If you're someone who watches, you know, film screenings, you know that it is rare to have not just like a sign language interpreter, but to have captions available on a pre-screening. That's unconscionable.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine that it's expensive.
You build it into your fucking budget, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I get a smaller nonprofit would have a hard time doing that, but like live captions or an ASL interpreter, right? Like they are different ways of solving a similar need. But also Sundance, you know, I don't think Sundance has a problem securing sponsorships to pay for things. So, so you know, so I like to hear that like they are making at least an effort with their external partners to be more mindful of those things. And and just a reminder to all of us, like, what can we do to make sure that our work is accessible? And I think about that a lot with like all of our videos previous to the podcast were had English captions, not automated. Like we actually did them, but our podcast doesn't have captions or transcripts, right? Yeah. And I think that's something I think about a lot and get a little anxious around the cost of it, but maybe we should revisit that. And
we should, because I mean, like the auto-generated captions on YouTube are not enough.
No,
you know,
they're not. They're not. Yeah. All right. Cool. Thanks so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Join us next week as we talk about the hotly anticipated new film from Shaka King, Judas and the Black Messiah. Stay tuned for the bonus episode, which is only available to folks who are patrons. So if you want to learn more, head over to patreon.com/femfreak. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what I watched at Sundance, and Ebony is going to regale us with her lemonade
Beyonce impression.
Of the Dust.
I tell you what, I'm gonna look a lot like what's his name, Titus Burgess.
Hell yeah,
Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. A show that whatever we could talk about that bullshit, but anyways, that's what my Beyonce impression looks like.
I mean, I might make her give us a little hair report too, although that might take 10 years because this film.
Seriously, we ain't got the time.
Yeah. Anyways, okay, our show is engineered by Rob Para. Carrie Stimpson provides technical support. Artwork by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Thanks so much.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.